Let's see. Now, where'd I go? My picture should be here. Aha. Okay. There we go. Hello. Welcome to the newest Train Your Brain, Claim Your Power. It's my pleasure to be joined on this call by Dr. Randall Bell. And I have to tell you, I met Dr. Bell when he came and appeared on our show, Home and Family. And he was talking about his book, Me We Do Be and Thrivers. And as I listened to what he was saying, I realized that there was something about Peter's and my experience through the landslide that really resonated with what he was saying about thrivers. So I had to introduce myself. And as it turns out, we've been friends ever since. It's been great. So when I planned this call, I couldn't think of a better person to come and talk to us about our current circumstances. I guess for the most part, we're either staying at home or trying to figure out how we're going to get back to work, and are surprised by, I don't know if we're surprised, but we're very aware that the economy is more fragile than we would realize, having been at such a high point earlier, and then suddenly that precipitous drop. I mean, it really was a deep dive down. So now, as we look at how we're going to come back out, there are all these restrictions on what we can and cannot do. Some of them are very expensive. Some of them make businesses unprofitable because they just can't get enough bodies in, or they have staffing reductions. I know that the offices where my show is located, they have to cut their workforce 25%. So that many people will still be working from home once they reopen. And we still have, they have gone through all sorts of things to accommodate for social distancing and still work. And now, and obviously this is something everyone is still trying to figure out. But fortunately for us, Dr. Bell is a sociologist and an economist who specializes in disaster recovery. And he has been retained by the US and other governments and all sorts of corporations to help resolve what comes out of a crisis. And his quote here is, he has generated billions of dollars to rebuild damaged lives and communities. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But some of the places or some of the tragedies he's worked at include the World Trade Center, Flight 93, Sandy Hook, BP Oil, Hurricanes Katrina and Harvey, and the Bikini Atoll nuclear test site. He also has covered some of those world-class trials and murder cases like O.J. Simpson and John Benet Ramsey. So he's, in every case, he has been in a position to observe the emotional consequences from a disaster and seeing that some people fare better than others. So he was inspired to create a business where he actually works and studies the cycle of trauma, and then he talks about it on TV, he's written books about it, and he appeared on Home and Family, obviously. He is the author of Me We Do Be, and the founder of Core IQ, which is a nonprofit educational foundation that provides free education online. And that's a new program for him. So he also does jail ministries. I mean, man does not have enough on his plate. So please welcome Dr. Bell. I am so delighted to have you here today.
Susan, it's always great to see you. Thank you for having me very much.
So I'm going to go hit that question. I've always been curious, just exactly what do you do that generates billions of dollars to rebuild lives and communities?
Well, fair question, Susan. I will finally answer it for you. Basically, when there's a disaster, like for example, right now we're working on Hurricane Harvey actively right now in our office, and we have literally thousands, if not tens of thousands, of clients whose homes were damaged with the hurricane, and they need to be compensated. I mean, they bought homes and they were flooded and their lives were turned upside down, much like your situation with the landslide. And And so I use my economic background, and I have a team, a very capable team, and we go in and we assess and we compute all the damages. So basically, when someone says, well, this disaster cost, the community 200 million or 2 billion, our team actually computes those numbers. And therefore, legal claims or insurance claims, typically, not always, like the World Trade Center was not litigation, but there was nonetheless somewhat of a dispute. So we go in and compute the numbers, and then we present them to the clients, to the insurance companies, to the juries, and say, here are our calculations, and here's how we came to them. And then, of course, we have to be ready to, to defend those numbers. Like you mentioned, the Bikini Atoll, we got a $2 billion verdict just in that case, where the federal government had conducted nuclear tests on this island nation, and it displaced everybody. So my clients were the local people who lost their family, their ancestral lands. And so we actually had to compute that number, and we got a verdict for them to clean up the island of radioactivity and come back home. So that's basically what I've been doing since the 1980s.
Wow. Was the Bikini Atoll that recently?
No, actually, I think before we were born. It was in 1954, but for some reason it took decades to computing the damages and compensating the people for the damages that they've been through. I mean, basically, what we had done is we moved people off the island on the premise that they're going to be back in a few weeks. We then detonated nuclear bombs. They were highly radioactive, and we basically supplied those people with Spam and canned grape juice for decades. That's not real compensation.
No.
So the real compensation came later.
Gotcha. Well, I could see where your role in that, evaluating what that damage is I can see now why it's worth so much. I do think that your role as a socioeconomist through all these disasters makes you the perfect person to help people who are trying to understand what we're going through on this little venture where, we wake up on a Monday and the world is perfect, and 24 hours later we're in a complete catastrophe. So I think what I'm really aware of when I'm talking to people now is that we are running the gamut of emotions. We have people who have gone through shock. They've actually either been sick or they've known someone who was sick. Maybe they've lost somebody. I only know of one person who's passed away specifically from the virus, an old friend from high school that passed. The economic effect is going to be more long lasting, I think, although looking at the stock market, you can't gauge that. I just wonder, how are we going to take all of this newness of all the mitigation techniques that have been given to us, and the fact that, how are we going to get back to work? What's stopping us from working? Are we depressed? Are we angry? What can we do to get through it?
That's a big question, but the big picture is that this trauma that we're all going through, and I'm going through it, you're going through it, everybody's going through it, is new, but trauma itself is not new. Trauma is as old as mankind, or humankind, I should say. And there's been some remarkable research done over the last just maybe 10 years that really gives us not just a solid answer, but a scientifically verifiable answer about it. And the number one point when I'm talking to someone who's been through a trauma, including this one, is a principle I call sitting in the fire. And it means having those uncomfortable conversations. Sitting with a trusted person, and whether that's a friend or journaling or a therapist, which you can do online now, but find somebody that you can have those uncomfortable conversations and say, you know what, I'm feeling depressed, or you know what, I'm feeling really lonely, or you know what, I'm feeling really angry. Whatever it is, if you bottle it inside, it is like a steam boiler, or it's like a volcano, and the pressure builds and builds and builds, and then it explodes, and that's not pretty. So the antidote for all of this is sitting in the fire with your feelings and really expressing those things, because you've got to consciously talk about it, or if you don't, it will subconsciously brew within you and explode in ways we regret in big ways later. So that's the number one point, is to get through it, do exactly what we're doing right now, and talking about this very real event.
Now, where does that take us? We talk about it, we get the emotions out, we acknowledge them. Why do we need to do that? What happens next after that?
Well, the real kind of target that we want to hit is to take the fuel, because by college age, somewhere between 66 and 85% of everybody has been through a trauma. With this coronavirus, it's an arguable point that everybody has been through a trauma now, 100%, because this is a traumatizing event. But the mindset you want to have to train your brain is to look at it as fuel. This is a high emotion experience. The emotions may be all over the place, but those are strong emotions, and you want to look at those emotions as fuel, to fuel something really good. Instead of trying to suppress it or ignore it or disregard it, you do just the opposite of what society teaches us to do, and that's to just embrace it. It is what it is, and use it as fuel to and not be a fool, to do something really exciting with it. Now that takes us all kinds of places, but that's the key principle.
Well, that's what I noticed immediately after that first few, when everybody went into hiding, went into staying at home mode. And I kept seeing all these businesses, all these people who were now suddenly doing something incredible. They were out donating. I had a list at one point. There were the beer or the distilleries who realized we needed sanitizer and converted their facilities to be able to make hand sanitizer. And then another company in North Carolina realized that they would need containers to put the sanitizer in order to distribute it, and sent it in by the millions of bottles of containers. There were people who were involved in, I think it's the company, the My Pillow fellow, who did he converted a whole building in his facility to making face masks. And at Universal, the talent or the wardrobe department got together and began making face masks for the staff when they finally do get back, because they're going to have face masks for everyone. So there was all this creativity going into this giving back to people, which I found fascinating. Is that what you're talking about, that kind of fueling?
I think you're hitting the nail right on the head, Susan. It is being creative and using your skill set, whatever they are. And I'm a firm believer God's given everyone a gift. And everybody's gifts are valuable, and everybody's gifts are different. And I'm inspired by hearing what you just shared about the folks at Universal and the My Pillow guy and all of this. And it really reminds me, Susan, with every disaster I see, despite the fact that there are people that make big mistakes that cause a disaster or terrorize people, there are bad people out there. I get that. But there are far more good people. It's like tea. You don't know how strong something is until you drop the tea in the hot water, and we're all in hot water right now, and we're all seeing what we're made out of. And some people, aren't so great, but most people are terrific, and they're doing great things for the community. And I actually started a list because the first week or two of the coronavirus, I write books about this stuff. I do research on this stuff, and I was really kind of, it was pretty, it's a bad thing for me. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to practice what I preach. I started a list and of things I was going to accomplish while I'm on this house arrest, situation.
Right.
And I'm looking at it and wow, I've actually done some cool things. So the key thing is you got to be creative, and you got to switch that part of the brain on that says, you know what, it is what it is, and I'm dropped in some hot water. Let's see what I'm made out of. Let's see what creative juices flow out of this. And whatever my skill set is, let's do something cool with it.
I think you're right. Doing something cool with it is a neat part of this. We don't know what's going to come out of it. I see lots and lots of changes online. It's like this was a disruptor that came through the economy and is forcing us to do things a new way. So schools online, meetings, not everyone working from home and coming together once during the day for a meeting to sort of all stay on the same page. Telehealth, where you can get the doctor to call you and you have a telephone appointment. Ordering online obviously has picked up, and it's being delivered. Online church services, and there actually is an organization out there now who helps churches go online because it's a necessary part of what they do. So, I guess people are asking, is this the new normal? That we are not going to go back to our regular jobs the way we've done them before? And what will this new economy include, and what can we offer so that we're still relevant? Maybe we've never been online, never spent any time online. How do we stay relevant in this new environment? That's a big question on everybody's mind.
Yeah, you grow or die, don't you? You either wake up and go with the new lessons, or frankly, your relevance does die, or your spirit dies, which is worse. We were having dinner once, and Peter said something to me that was brilliant. In fact, I got this book coming out, and this is just the cover design we're working on. It's called Post-Traumatic Thriving. And so I want to share some of the points of this. The book's not even out now, so I'm not promoting it. I'm just saying that I've been doing a lot of thinking on this point. And Peter said something that was a game changer, because we were chatting, and he said, that landslide was the best thing that ever happened to us. And I thought, how can you say that about having a beautiful home? You've put all kinds of years of care and fixing up and so forth into your home, and then a landslide breaks it in half and makes it uninhabitable. How can that be the best thing that's ever happened to you? And his answer was, well, because we were comfortable, but we weren't really living our dream. And because of this disaster, it forced us to get out there and do what we really have been dreaming about, which was a whole different program, a whole different thing, which has been absolutely terrific. So that's what we got to do. We got to be creative, and we got to look at the silver lining in these clouds that are being heaped on us. And a lot of people are doing it, and sadly, some people are not. But I think more and more people are kind of catching the wave, getting the vision.
Well, they are. I also think it's interesting that we have so many public and private partnerships going on. That the government has really pulled a lot of different people together. And there's all these hashtags. You can go hashtag alone together, or hashtag open we stand, or America together. There are any number of places you can go to find out where you can contribute. And they've got it listed out there for you so that you don't have to be alone going, oh, I wish I knew what I could do. You can look for somebody else to give you assistance. Oh, and then I heard I watch a lot of news, and I saw Mark Cuban say that one of the great things that's going to come out of this is when you go for your next job interview, one of the things they're going to ask you is, what did you learn from the great pandemic?
Yeah, I think he hit it with that question, because that's exactly it. And it's kind of interesting, because a lot of people in life have had kind of trauma-free, crisis-free lives, and particularly in the United States, where we're so blessed, a lot of people live very, very comfortably, and this situation has dropped us in that hot water and has made basically everyone uncomfortable. And I'll tell you, to answer Mark Cuban's question, my firm, where we study the economics effects of disasters, we had a staff meeting every Wednesday at 12 o'clock. We'd order in lunch for everyone, and we'd all sit around the boardroom, and we would have conversations about all our cases. And that staff meeting would go for a couple hours, and that was basically the essence of our all hands on deck communication. And it was very good, and it was very effective. But since the coronavirus, we now hop on a Zoom call at 8:30 every morning, and we kind of go over things. And it was awkward at first, but we've been doing it now for weeks, and we've decided that's a thing we're going to continue forevermore. Because I'm on the plane a lot, I'm around, looking at different sites around the country, around the world. Other people on the team are off doing things. We have people in New York. And so to all hop on the call at 8:30, and maybe that call's only 15 minutes, we are communicating. We all know what each other is doing. We are getting so much more effective. And frankly, it's more fun. It's not fun being in the dark. It's more fun being in the light and being aware of what's going on, and more real-time progress. So that's for me personally, that's a big one. But your point is that you don't have to tackle this alone. Look around for ideas, because maybe the idea I just shared doesn't apply to you, or maybe it's like right on the money, or the online church. That's awesome. I happen to do some of my schooling with a school that had brick and mortar classrooms, but we did a lot of stuff online. So getting online was easier for me. It's more challenging for others. But look at the landscape. And as I say, you don't have to start from ground zero. You can look at what other great ideas people are, and then cherry pick the ones that make sense for you.
I think that's a big, a really good suggestion, because people are going out, they're all experimenting. Nobody really knows what's going to work and what isn't. But if you're watching and observing what other people are doing, then you have a chance to say, that worked, or, oh my gosh, that just blew up in his face. I'm not going to try that. So that's the point we all have to come to, where we can just observe and then apply it in our lives when it works.
Yeah. Yeah, and taking a look around, and also remember self-care. I mean, watch the funny movies. Music is a profound thing. I think I mentioned to you once, I wrote a book with Mrs. Fender. Her husband invented the electric guitar, and there's a backstory to that. Leo Fender invented the electric guitar because of a intense dream he had, a kind of a divine encounter, and he was told explicitly that the world's a tough place and music makes it better. So not only, the last thing you want to do is sit around and feel sorry for yourself. And although there's some great educational and interesting TV, you want to do that plus, a balance of other things to find kind of the recipe that makes sense to you. One thing I'm big on is listen to your inner voice. Don't necessarily do something that somebody tells you drive yourself crazy. Listen to your inner voice for what's right for you, and you'll find it.
It seems to me that I having read an advanced copy of your book, one of the things that you talk about in there is something called grounding, which to me is something I would call, I might call it a disidentification exercise, because you're getting in touch with your body, or you might call it centering. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could explain because that would be something that would be very helpful for people when they're trying to get rid of that stress that they're carrying with them?
That's a great question, Susan. We talked about sitting in the fire, and the other one is grounding. Those are the dynamic duo. I have seen the most intense, down and out people get back on their feet with just these two principles. They are powerful. They're not necessarily, they're simple, but they're not necessarily easy, but they are both definitely powerful. Now, we talked about sitting in the fire and just having those conversations about where you're coming from, good or bad, and having authentic connections. But the second one is grounding. I'm going to tell you a quick story. I was on a plane once going from, of all places, Phoenix to South Dakota. A guy sat down next to me. He goes, "Are you Randall Bell?" And I looked up and I said, "Yeah." "Are you Sean?" And it was an old buddy. I hadn't seen him in 15 years. So we're talking, and he said, he told me that he was volunteering with San Quentin Prison. And I was absolutely fascinated. And my poor buddy was just peppered. I was peppering him with questions the whole flight about what was it like to go inside of a prison. I'd never been inside one. And so he said, "If you want to go to prison, I'll get you in prison." And I thought, Jesus taught, this concept to visit those in prison. I never have. I've been kind of negligent there, I guess. So sure. So I actually had to put paperwork in to get approved to go into prison. and somehow I passed the mark. And I went into prison, and I had all these pre-notions of what these inmates would be like. I went in to this concrete room. All these guys walked in that were twice my size, and it kind of intimidating, but they were the nicest, gentlest guys. And they had been through this program, and we all sat in a circle. And for the very first time in my life, we don't call it meditation, because I personally don't have a problem with the word meditation, but some people do, because it brings up religious ideas that aren't really relevant here. We're talking about a secular thing. And so I'm sitting between two guys that were convicted of murder, meditating or grounding for the first time. And it's very simple. You just close your eyes and you wiggle your toes and you focus on your breathing. And it's described in the book, but it's very simple. And it's just basically kind of doing a body scan, starting from your toes to the top of your head, how you're feeling. Maybe spend a moment thinking about each of your five senses. Focus on your breathing, 5 minutes. And so I thought, well, that was fascinating. I liked it so much, I kind of started doing it at home. And then I started going back to prison more and more. And then the Orange County jail system, where I volunteer now. And, but I didn't really get it fully. And then another story is, long story short, a friend invited me to climb Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa, like a dummy. I said yes without doing my homework. I went to my cardiologist. They said, "You need heart surgery." I thought, oh my goodness. So I went to another cardiologist. She said, "Start meditating, start grounding." And I thought, okay. I started doing it along with the other things she prescribed, and I made it to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. And that's when it hit me, from literally what I was taught in prison to my cardiologist. And she handed me studies out of Harvard University showing scientifically, this is not anecdotal nonsense. This is scientifically proven that grounding practices resets the electrical systems in your brain. So if you're gonna train your brain, pick your passion, whether you want to call it grounding, meditation, prayer, nature walks, yoga. That is absolutely an essential practice. I can't be more adamant about it. So forgive my long storytelling, but I really wanted to bring this point home, how important this is.
Well, that's something I would bring home too. I feel that's really important. It's, for me, it's how I get rid of the stress and start the day properly. I come from a place of calm instead of frenetic. By the time I get to the office, there's enough to start setting me off to frenetic. So anyway, for the next few weeks, we're going to take care of ourselves, right? We're going to get a grasp on our situation and share it with others. And we're going to be grounding so that we can calm the anxiety around us. And then we're going to be open to new ideas that are going to be helping us solve problems that confront us. Now, all of that sounds pretty cut and dried. Doesn't sound hard to do at all. What's next?
Well, I agree with what you said, but I'd add another dimension to it. You want to look at new skills, but sometimes that means going back to old skills. Because, for example, I used to, when I was in high school and started college, I worked at Pizza Pub on State College Boulevard in Fullerton, California, and I had a job, and I was a cook. We made dough from scratch, and I made the sauces from scratch. And so I hadn't done it for a long time, but I know how to cook a little bit and make pizzas. So sometimes that new thing may actually be going back in time to a prior skill, because my daughter was just here with her husband, and we had a delicious pizza last night. And so you just want to look forward, you want to look backwards and scan the whole horizon and kind of pick those things that kind of hit you and say, hey, that would be fun to revisit that, or it'd be fun to try something new. It's the whole combination of old and new.
Oh, I like that. Old and new. That's great. Now that's basically just survival at that point. We stand up and we move forward, and that's our survival mode. Is there another level that we can get to?
Yeah. There is. There's actually 3 levels. Stage 1 is the dive stage. That's where you feel the shock. And let's be honest, it's shocking to be in a house arrest, having our governor tell us that we need permission to enjoy the sunset and walk our dog. That's pretty shocking. It's kind of silly too. There's denial. I can't believe this is happening to me. There's anger. There's the bargaining, whether we bargain with God or we bargain with the government, or there's bargaining going on, and ultimately there can be a lot of depression if we're honest. So that's the dive stage. The survival stage is just kind of getting back to kind of a balance where we kind of confront the situation. We've been talking about that, and sort it out and experiment with different things. We just talked about that. Coming to some acceptance that, hey, we're like it or not, we're in a new world with a new landscape, and kind of an awareness of that. That's survival. But the third stage, and the one that I'm really targeting, is to focus on what people have done that thrive. So we go dive, survive, and thrive. And thriving is where we want to go.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, there's, and I want, before, I'm going to tell you, Susan, I'm going to tell you, but I got to tell you, it's kind of like shampoo. It's a rinse and repeat process. Okay, so I don't want anybody to get sugar-coated notions that, you know, once I thrive, I'm never going to have days where I feel depressed, or I'm not going to get angry again. It's rinse and repeat. But in that process, you get to more and more thriving. So the first step, Susan, is what I call passion. It's a passion in a higher power. It's something bigger than ourselves. Now, I'm not a preacher by a long shot, but I have a passion about God and my faith. And I respect people of other faiths. I was just in India a little over a year ago, and I went to Hindu temples, I went to Buddhist temples, I even went to a mosque during prayer time, and I was immersed in other cultures and other faiths. And I gotta say that I believe, and I heard this from my pastor, God never made a single person he didn't love, and that includes everyone around the planet. So it's really essential if you want to thrive, and this is academic literature and studies. This is not just anecdotal, but those who thrive, there is a statistical correlation with having some kind of faith structure, whatever that looks like to you. or to anybody. So that's the first step.
I have to say, having read your book, that it is, the faith portion is one of the most profound discussions of where we find our faith, where we put our, what we put our faith in, whether you're a scientist, or is it, is it creative intelligence? Is it some, it was a very well laid out argument about creative intelligence and a divine power, a creative power. And I thought it was incredibly brave of you to go there, because it's such, in our divisive world, things like faith are not talked about very much.
You're absolutely right. And right behind me is a bookshelf, and I have all the books written by atheists, and I've read them, and I'm okay. I respect somebody that takes that point of view as a person. In fact, the best man in my wedding is an atheist, and we're still very good friends. But that being said, there are some atheists that really got me thinking about this, because frankly, they're kind of militant about it, and they're very condescending about their position. I mean, if they want to be atheists, that's fine, but I do draw the line where you start, in with the insulting language, and naming your book The God Delusion. Well, just because I believe in God does not make me delusional. And that's where I kind of said, okay, I'm a social scientist. I will use science to back up what I have to say. And that's where I started really researching it and backing it up, because while I respect people and I try to be gentle in my conversations, I won't tolerate somebody who's insulting people of faith, because there are very healthy and very well-reasoned and very intellectually sound bases for having faith. And I will stand by that. So that was where it all kind of came from.
I know you also, there's a subtitle to your book, which has to do with resilience, and that thrivers are resilient people.
Yeah.
What does that, what exactly, how do you define resilience?
Yeah, it's the art, science, and stories of resilience. And resilience, if you look it up in the dictionary, is the ability to bounce back. And it's kind of this mixture of yin and yang, or whatever you want to call it, where you have to acknowledge, you don't want, as we talked about earlier, you don't want to bury the bad stuff, but you also, it's okay, as I say in the book, it's okay to be angry, as long as you don't get stuck there, and as long as you don't hurt yourself or hurt someone else. It's perfectly okay to be angry. But resilience is the ability to not stay there. It's essential that we go there for an appropriate period of time, but we bounce back. And ultimately, that's what survivors and thrivers do. And by the way, people that simply survive have my respect, but the thrivers have got something a little more to it. And they've, again, captured that fuel from the whole situation to do something really remarkable. And that's always intriguing to me.
It is. It really is. I realized when I was preparing for this. Do you know who Joe Vitale is? Do you know his name?
Tell me.
He is he's a marketing expert. Joe was he's done he's written all sorts of books about advertising and marketing, but his background is that he was homeless on the streets of Texas somewhere, I think it was, and something happened in his life that gave him an epiphany, and he began to pull out of that, and he became a thriver. He went from someone who was, flat broke on the streets to an incredibly successful marketing person. He mastered the art of forgiveness through the Hawaiian mystery or mystical tradition of Ho'oponopono, and his life is now, a completely reverse scenario from where he was, years earlier. So I find that fascinating to find people like that. All of a sudden you realize they really have overcome an incredible amount of stuff.
Yeah, and I have nothing but respect for that. For years I volunteered at the Friendship Shelter, which is a homeless shelter in Laguna Beach, and And I met a lot of people who are literally homeless, and it's shocking because it can happen to anyone. For example, one of the people there was really a terrific lady. She had been an executive. She was in a car crash, which anybody can, sadly can happen to anyone. She got on pain meds, became addicted to them. Long story short, she lost her husband divorced her, her kids wouldn't speak to her, she lost her job, and she became an addict and was on the street. And there she was with nothing in a homeless shelter. Well, she came to the life skills class that I was there teaching, and about a year or two later, I was still teaching there, and she came in the back door, and she had reconnected with her children, was on speaking terms with her ex-husband, had a very great job, gotten a job back, was back on her feet, and was just there to say hello. So anybody, even someone in prison, I just went to a college graduation of a guy convicted of murder, out on parole, and he just graduated. He didn't just graduate, he graduated with honors. And I was at his graduation. I didn't graduate with honors, he did. So I love the story you shared about the homeless gentleman. I've seen it with my own eyes, and that's the power of these principles. This isn't just happy talk. This isn't Happy Valley sunshine. This is real stuff. If people will pay attention, they can do remarkable things with their lives. And you got to connect with people. You got to get out there, and you've got to, you said it, forgive. You forgive yourself, forgive others, and that's a process in and of itself.
Now, are there other techniques they use? I'm thinking they're capable of reshaping their thinking, and they take off in a direction. They use that fuel to blast off towards some sort of goals. Where do they find all this information to help them go forward?
The thing about forgiveness is to call out some of the worst advice ever given, and that's to forgive and forget. I mean, a lot of people have been through some really horrible situations. We're going through the coronavirus. A year from now, we're not going to forget about it and say, what happened back then? I forgot. This is a life-building lesson, and we should never forget it. Not that there's necessarily one to forgive, or maybe there is. We'll find out. But for example, people have been through horrible crimes, horrible natural disasters. The example I use in my book with the whole with post-traumatic thriving that I'm working on is I had a heart surgery when I was born with a congenital heart defect. Only recently, since writing this book, have I been talking about it. I was doing exactly the wrong thing by burying it. And I had resentment towards my parents who concealed it from me. I had resentment towards God for allowing me to be born with it. I had junk. And so forgiveness is not about forgetting. It's about remembering, but the goal is to allow the thought to go through our minds without being triggered, without getting really upset. Now I can talk about my heart surgery like I'm talking about a glass of something. So it doesn't upset me. I don't have a rush of those old anxieties and depressions anymore. That's where we want to get with forgiveness. But who's been abused that wants to, of course you want to forget it. It's an ugly situation. But that's what society teaches us. Society teaches us to stuff our feelings. Forgiveness is about remembering it, but letting go of the anger, not letting go of the lessons.
That's powerful. And it's forgiveness of others, forgiveness of ourselves, being able to accept our part in something, that's part of the Ho'oponopono training, that we tend to blame other people, and we don't accept that somehow we contributed to that situation. So that we have to learn how to forgive ourselves and accept what's going on. Very, very powerful stuff. We talk about vision boards. We talk about, you know, visualizing and doing techniques like that in order to move forward. I find, you keep mentioning your story about Mount Kilimanjaro, and I find that a fascinating story because what you mentioned earlier, it's a step-by-step process to get up that mountain. And that you were able to do it, having at the time, you know, been warned about your heart condition, and you still did it, and you came through beautifully all the way to the top. What was it that you did that made you able to do it?
I still can't believe I did it because Susan, the whole way up, I'm looking for Jeep trails or helicopter landing pads to get me out of there because I bit off more than I could chew. But I was standing there at the base of this mountain thinking, you know, I was with 3 buddies, and this is less than a year ago. It just happened, and this local guy, this older guy came up, who lived in Africa, and he came up and he obviously had something important to tell me, and he kind of whispered it, and he goes, you know what? Look at that mountain, and as you're climbing it, I want you to remember 2 things. I go, great, I need your advice. What is it? He says, it's all in your head. This is not a physical challenge. You think it's a physical challenge, it's all mental. And I thought, well, it looks physical to me, but okay, I'm gonna go with that. And I said, what's the other thing? He said, remember pulley. And I go, what? I don't know what that means. He says, it means take it really, really slow. He said, these young kids come out here and they build up that mountain because they got all this youth and energy, and they come down in stretchers. He said, go really slow because the mountain will not respect you unless you respect it, and take it really slow and acclimate, you know, slowly, because you're going up to remarkable altitudes that can kill you. And I mean, literally. So, and the whole trip up the mountain, I kept thinking, this is mental, you know, the cold, the sweat, the this, the that, it's all mental. And I can take a few more steps. And then I had no choice. I went slow because I'm 61 years old. And the last day was the hardest day in my life because I'm not kidding you, Susan, we hiked for 36 hours straight to the summit. And it was hideous. And when we got to the top, I couldn't believe we were there. I still can't believe we were there. We were walking like astronauts with 6-inch steps because the air is so thin. But we made it. And those were the principles that got us to the top.
Wow. Step by step, one step at a time. That is I think there's an analogy there to what we're, you know, facing right now, which is that we will get through this, but it's going to have to be one step at a time. You can't jump ahead because you might get into trouble. You might you know, the whole virus thing may come around again. But we can, if we take it slow and carefully and plan ahead, break it out and plan ahead what we have to do, we'll get through with it.
Yeah, and just like I listened to that expert, who gave me really great advice, which I listened to, you know, Train Your Brain has some great advice. So, you know, I'm listening to, because you're talking to some interesting folks, and you've come up with some brilliant concepts of your own, and we got to set goals, we got to look for new meaning, and we got to listen to people who have been around the block and see what might apply to us and rethink our thinking, train our brains. I love the train the brain theme.
I do too, because it applies to so many things. I have, you know, in my core vision of this, there are, it sort of relates to your core IQ project as well, but there are key areas in our lives that we don't always know what we're supposed to do or how to deal with it properly. So so you train your brain so you can look at your health and how you take care of yourself, and you can learn how to eat better and exercise and just care for yourself. And in an emergency, how to do first aid. I mean, there's so many things that you can do physically. And then you have another area of your finance. You can't ignore your finance. If you don't manage your money will manage you, and not always in a positive way. So you train your brain to deal with those things, to deal with budgets, to deal with paying bills and saving money and having some sort of a financial plan or wealth management system. You learn you train your brain to help you be more resilient. Because by your routines and your practices, you can become a more resilient human being. You train your brain so you can get along with people better and have social and community involvement, which it's so critical. After we had our landslide, our church was probably the most important part of our lives, and everybody banded together around us, and they helped us get through that. So the importance of setting up communities, sometimes you have to train your brain to be tolerant of other people in order to get to the gems that are within them. So there's a lot of brain training that's involved with that. There is this sense of preparedness. It's important to be prepared, that I don't necessarily mean you have to be a prepper, as they call them, where you have all the stockpiles for 5 years of living by yourself in your house. But there is something to be said for having the something at home, so that if something such as this staying at home order, did you have enough food in your house? Do you have the classic now, the joke for everyone is the run on toilet paper. No one anticipated that there would be such a crazy response to the issue of not having enough toilet paper at home. So these are all things, they're all part of your foundational elements that we put into life. And that's what I like about Core IQ, is that you're looking similarly at these basic areas in life where we need to have control of our space and organization in order to have some calmness and reduce the anxiety in our lives. There are leadership questions, and there are opportunities to learn management skills within that program. So I think we can train our brains. We can learn these skills, and it doesn't matter when we start to learn them. They will apply. So I think that's cool. So what are we learning now? Yeah. We're ready. We're going to survive this economic disaster. What does that mean? I mean, what am I looking at now? Day to day, just regular day to day?
Well, I think you covered your what you just shared. It was beautifully said. Not much to add to it. I would just say that on the finance side, a principle that I teach my kids, I hope they listen, that I try to live myself, is the 80-10-10. Save 10% of your money, because when times like this come, it's not a problem financially. If you're consuming everything you're earning, that's not a recipe for success. So save 10%, 10% with charity. Some people call it tithing. What is not necessarily tithing. It may or may not be, but what it is put 10% to help those on the margins of society, and maybe buy something and give it directly to them. When I walk into a convenience store around here and there's a homeless person outside and they ask for a few bucks, I say, are you hungry? And they whatever, and I'll get you whatever you want. Tell me what you like. You like Coke or Pepsi, and I'll go in and grab them something to eat. And actually spending that money and handing it to the recipient directly rather than some distant, far away charity works well for me. So sharing with others, and then living with some discipline on the 80% that you have. It was something I'd asked the financial realm. One thing I gotta share, and I'm still doing the more research on this, but in this house arrest that we're going through, I gained it's embarrassing. I gained 17 pounds quickly because I wasn't out. I normally run or 5 or 10 miles a day. And I couldn't run for various reasons. And so I gained a lot of weight fast. And then a buddy told me about sweet potatoes. I'd never bought a sweet potato in my life. I went down and bought 3 bags. There's a scientific principle, I can't pronounce it. It's something like satiety or something like that. But it basically means fullness factor. And I started supplementing everything I ate with sweet potatoes, which have very low calories, need no oil. If you boil them, they need no oil, no butter, no salt. They taste great just as they are. And you supplement whatever you eat with them, they leave you feeling full. This scientific word basically means fullness. And I like feeling full. And I've already lost 12 of those 17 pounds.
Oh, fantastic.
This is just over this quarantine time. It's fascinating. So, excuse me, in terms of taking care of ourselves, that's something I learned. That's going to be a lifelong habit for me. I'm certain about it. And then your comment about your church, and that's so beautiful about the importance of having a faith-based community. And what you're talking about in sociological terms is social capital. Because I'm sure that for years in attending your church, you've been contributing to other people's lives. It's basically putting money in the bank account so that when you and Peter had that horrible landslide situation, people were, through love and generosity and social capital, willing to repay. So those relationships are worth way more than gold or platinum. So I just want to share that. But ultimately, where we want to arrive in this whole journey is a sense of meaning and gratitude where, a year from now, when we're hopefully looking back on this whole thing, we can say, you know what, I wasn't glad that happened, but I'm glad I learned these lessons, whether it's sweet potatoes or 80-10-10 or social capital or renewing my faith in God or whatever it is that we can be grateful for those skills, again, whether it's learning Zoom calls or relearning how to make pizzas, whatever it is. So that's where we want to use this fuel. And it's all, again, based on this dynamic dual of grounding and sitting in the fire and having the great conversations like we're having.
Awesome. Well put. Well put. I have, I'm struck by what you said in terms of routine, because the things you're saying are part of my daily routine. So things like being thankful, expressing gratitude, appreciating other people, and they appreciate you. And so again, you're building social capital, and that to make that part of your day-to-day operation makes such a difference. And I found, for me, having it on paper, and you have your chart, that list of things you wanted to accomplish, and you've been marking them off as you did them. And I have a daily routine. I break it into 2-hour blocks, and it gives me a structure to my day that I'm going to put 2 hours devoted to something that I need to accomplish. I may not complete it in 2 hours, but then I go on to something else so that I have a well-rounded day. I'm cooking at home. I'm eating 3 square meals a day. It sounds so funny, but and I actually have lost weight. And so I attribute that to not having all the set food, which is filled with lots and lots of starches and carbs and things that you just grab and go kind of thing. But there is a lot of lesson to be learned here for all of us, I think. So, Is there anything else that you would recommend to people to get on with this lesson that we're learning? Do they need to try it?
I think the capstone that I've seen. I'm sorry.
No, it's
I'm sorry.
fine.
I interrupted. There's the capstone from all of this in terms of post-traumatic thriving is to work through the dive stage and don't gloss over those. Get to survival and then experiment with new things and thrive. The pinnacle is service, looking for ways to help others do better. I'll tell you, I'll just be honest. I've lived a life with two great parents. I grew up in Orange County and was very blessed, overly blessed, more than I ever deserved, with the beach and the whole Southern California lifestyle, and all that came with it. But and frankly, I indulged in a lot of luxury things for a period of my life. And I'm kind of fond of saying I spent the first half of my life getting, and I want to spend the second half giving, because I get more out of trying to help others than I ever get from another luxury trip to somewhere. And I enjoy what I found works for me. It doesn't work for everyone. Is sitting on a cheap plastic chair in a jail or in a prison, helping someone who has really hit rock bottom in their life. They've made some really serious mistakes. They have enormous shame, and they have another enormous guilt. That's a whole different conversation. And but they're willing to reconstruct a new life going forward. And to see that, and it not only is possible, I've seen it happen over and over and over again. It's nothing short of miraculous. And so whatever your brand of or flavor of service looks like to you, that's what it looks like to me. Find where you can help someone else. That is the best thing, better than any Hawaiian vacation any day of the week, is helping others.
I agree. I agree. So tell us, when is your book on post-traumatic thriving going to be out where we can find it?
It's going to be everywhere, Amazon and all the bookstores and everything. I am pretty excited on it, Susan. I think I mentioned this to you before, but I've been working on this book for 7 years. It was very important to me that it not be a sugar-coated drive-by view of the situation, that it be backed up with real science, but also brought alive with real stories. I think you know some of the folks that I talk about. I don't know what I've done to be blessed with such a group of great friends, but who are willing to share their stories, but they're in there. And it's going to be this year, 2020. That I know. I can't tell you the month yet.
Okay. And what about Core IQ? That people can go there now, but it's still in development, correct?
There's a lot of material. It is still in development. You simply go to coreiq.com. There, if you wanted to give your credit card, you could never do it. It's all free. It's just stuff that I want my kids to know, and if somebody else wants to listen in, that's terrific. But we have some great folks that have come and shared things on finance, personal finance, faith. It's just all the things we need to know that we weren't taught in school. In fact, I don't want to put you on the spot, but we're going to have a side conversation, because I'd love to have you on Core IQ with a video there. But
that would be fun.
Maybe I am putting you on the spot. It's all there, and there's little handouts. There's one-page handouts for each topic, so you can get a quick grasp of the topic, and then you can go deep if you want to.
Having taken a look at it, I think it's a great idea, and I love the fact that people can learn something for free that's really an essential life skill. It's really awesome. So that brings us to the end of our time, and I thank you very much for being with us. It's been my pleasure to have you here and give me some new insights this morning. We will be doing another call next month on June 13th at 9 a.m. again, Pacific time. And I hope maybe we will be done with these lockdown orders, and we'll be able to get back to our jobs, or we'll have implemented mitigation steps so that we can get back to our jobs. So I think for our topic next month, I'd like us all to take an inventory. Good or bad, where were we before this all started? And where are we now? What do we need to do now? What obstacles have gotten in our way so that we can build a plan to move forward again? whether it's taking care of your health better, or doing more inner work, listening for new ideas, reconnecting with others, looking at our finances, because that may be a big one at that point. What do we need to do? More visualizing, more real action. Let's just take an inventory and figure that out, because it will be a time, let's say it's a time to regroup and put that fuel to work for all this that we've gone through into turning it into something better and a greater economy and a greater life than we had before. So I look forward to seeing you then. And in the meantime, have a great month. Thank you. Bye, everybody.